This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Maryland Chamber Foundation as we bring you a webinar on preparing for cybersecurity maturity model certification. My name is Whitney Harmel. I'm the Vice President of Membership and Development for the Maryland Chamber and the Maryland Chamber Foundation. We have a robust conversation that will occur today. So before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items with you. First and foremost, all attendees are muted and in listen-only mode. To ensure that you are muted throughout the call, please look for that symbol that you see here and to make sure that your phone and or your computer is muted. Please be aware that your webcam may be on and recording. If you do not wish to be recorded, you can certainly turn off your webcam, or if you'd like to see our speakers, you can turn it on and be able to view them during the conversation. There will be a robust question and answer period at the end. Look for the symbol on your screen here to add your questions into the chat feature. That way we can get to some of them at the very end. Of course, if we are not able to get to your questions today and you would like to have them passed on to any of our panelists, please feel free to email them to the Maryland Chamber and we will make sure that they get passed on. And then today's webinar, as you know, is being recorded and will be added to the Maryland Chamber's COVID-19 resources page, as well as our YouTube channel. If you give us just until this afternoon, everything will be up there and ready for you to view. We continue as the Maryland Chamber to provide many resources to all Maryland businesses, especially in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic. On this, you will find resources both state and federal, but we have created two documents that are very helpful for Maryland business owners, including our Renew Maryland initiative, as well as our Safe Workplace, which includes some best practices and baselines for reopening. Today marks phase 2, and so I wish everyone continued good health and safety as we continue to go through the phases. And thank you so much for joining the Maryland Chamber today, as we are very excited to bring you this webinar on CMMC. With that, it is my pleasure to turn it over to Jim Reese. He is the Director of Business Development for Offutt-Kerman. He is also our guest host today, and he will take it from here and introduce our speakers and get the conversation started. So Jim, kicking it over to you.
Thank you very much for your introduction, Whitney. We appreciate that. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here today to discuss CMMC and its impact on your business. We're excited to have a variety of cyber and expert perspectives on this webinar today. We have Brian Hubbard from Edwards Performance Solutions, who brings 36 years of experience with cybersecurity program development and assessment. We have Chris Reese-Mandel from Epic Inc., who has 25 years of experience in securely managing networks. And we also have Mark Berman joining us from the CMMC accreditation body. His perspective comes from the front row of this quickly evolving CMMC effort. Lastly, I am Jim Reese from Offutt-Kerman, and I will be guiding your discussion today. Next slide, please. Here's a brief overview of the direction that our conversation will take. We hope you find this information beneficial in better understanding CMMC and what you need to do to get your business prepared. As a reminder, before we begin, questions for the panel should be added to the Q&A box and will be addressed at the end of the discussion. Next slide, please. Mark, from the perspective of the body driving this initiative, will you give us a brief introduction to CMMC and the CMMC AB?
Absolutely. Thanks very much. And it's a pleasure to be here today and to have the support of the Maryland Chamber and all the great firms that are with us. CMMC is an initiative that the DoD started March in 2019, where they had recognized that the self-assessment criteria that all suppliers currently are supposed to go through. That's the NIST 800-171, if you've heard about that. It is a self-assessment where companies that have or control controlled unclassified information need to maintain and administer themselves the NIST 800-171. Well, it was realized that what we needed instead was something that was a little bit more robust, a maturity model, something that allowed us to have some insight in companies that maybe don't handle CUI, just regular companies. There are 300,000 contractors with the DoD, and also that the idea of a self-assessment wasn't the best thing. So instead, this will be a third-party assessment where each company that is a supplier to the DoD, there are 5 levels, levels 1 through 5. Mission critical programs are level 5. Far from mission critical programs, if you mow the lawn or if you make a delivery to a base, you may be level 1. So, and everything in between. So what CMMC is all about really is making sure that the cybersecurity hygiene and posture of all the suppliers to the DoD meets a criteria that is worthy and trustworthy for the DoD to use. We are losing $600 billion a year in lost IP. That's your businesses, and businesses like them are losing that IP to our adversaries. You're losing your competitive advantage, and we as a nation are losing our advantage and not protecting our troops in the field. So that's why we're doing it, that's what we're doing, and that's what CMMC is all about.
Thank you, Mark. Next slide, please. So Brian, what is driving the need for a new DoD regulation and the new certification process?
Okay, great. Yeah, and add my thanks to Mark's thanks for the Maryland Chamber to having us here, and really appreciate you all taking time out to come in and learn more about CMMC today. Well, you know, Mark touched on a lot of this, but you know, the main driver for CMMC and programs that have come before it is the huge drain of intellectual property and other types of information out of the U.S. defense industrial base into our adversaries, right? So it's really a matter of a national security issue that our defense industrial base needs to be secure, and they need to take the companies that are dealing with the Department of Defense and other government agencies need to take cybersecurity seriously. And the contracting officers and the folks putting together the procurements for the support need to understand and have an easier mechanism to require cybersecurity within the contracts. So CMMC was really designed to help take it to the next level, if you will. Again, Mark mentioned NIST 800-171, which is a great document. It's a good starting point for companies to look at and to do that self-assessment, really understand where your program is. The problem is the previous rules that were in place were not really able to really confirm that information was being secured. It was really a stepping stone that was allowing us to assess organizations to determine that they were trying to put the right things in place and had a plan of action milestones to get there, which was getting us in the right direction. But then CMMC is then the next step to help us to lock that in, to make it easier for contracting officers, and actually with some of the acquisition reform that's ongoing, is going to actually dictate how the defense industrial base is required to provide security.
Thanks, Brian. Next slide, please. So, Mark, can you speak to the timeline for rolling out such an impactful program?
Sure, absolutely. So the CMMC accreditation body is a private group of people. It's actually all volunteers, people who participate in the DIB in some way or another. Some of us are consultants, some of us work for companies who are suppliers. It's a group of people that came together, but we just started in January and it's now what? It's June, and so it's only been 4 or 5 months. So some of that timeline is a little bit unclear because we're still working on it. But what's about to happen is we will have an application process in place in the next few days, not weeks. So a lot of people have been waiting for that. So the C3 PAOs, which are the organizations that will do the contract to do the assessments, and their assessors will be able to start walking down that path. Now, as far as the actual, from the supplier's point of view, if you're a contractor, this summer and this fall is going to be a period of Pathfinder projects. These are projects where we are going to do assessments. They're not going to count for score for the companies that do them. The DoD is going to learn about the procurement process that includes a CMMC regulation. And at the same time, we're going to learn how to book assessments, how to work with C3POs, how to do these assessments. The model was just created. So this is a learning period. We are going to attack 10 prime contracts this year, and next year it's scheduled for another 10, maybe 15. So it's going to be a slow roll at the beginning, and then it's going to accelerate extremely quickly. The total plan is going to be 5 years. So it'll take 5 years to get to all the contractors. But if we fast forward to 2026, you won't sign a contract with the DoD without the CMMC clause built in. And so obviously 300,000 companies will take a while, but we're starting now. It also takes a while, especially at the higher levels, to get ready. So now is the time that everybody should be getting ready. Not only is in your interest from a compliance point of view, but anything that you discover is a weakness in your cybersecurity, and that's something that you should be taking care of out of self-interest as well.
Next slide, please. So we've talked about the why, and we've talked about the when. Now we got to talk about, is this just for large prime contractors? What other organizations should worry about this? So we got to talk about who. Are there things that contractors should be doing to help influence the rollout and the impact? So Chris, let's start with you. Tell us about who this is for, who's going to be impacted, who should be worried about this.
Well, obviously, it's as Mark kind of alluded to, it's it's going to start with the 10 primes, but as the most important part is, I think the message today, and to all the chamber members that are here and everyone else that attended, thank you, is that start now, and it's going to impact your government contractors, businesses that are even interested in becoming a contractor, or you're a subcontractor. So you'll see those flow downs come down from those primes as well too. So the sooner that you can go through your compliance checks, understand where your posture is, and start moving towards that compliance level that you want, it's going to be key. So I think the big part is understanding where you are currently in your process, understanding where you want to be, and then obviously B, talking to any key stakeholders in terms of your contracts, as well as your internal organizational members as well.
And Brian, are there things that contractors should be doing now to help influence the rollout and the impact?
Absolutely, and I'll give it a little bit of a historical perspective. That since I got into the cybersecurity industry, back before it was cybersecurity, back in the 80s, but even in the early 80s, there was attempts at contract reform and acquisition reform to influence cybersecurity and computer security at the time, to require something called the Orange Book be implemented across government contracts. The problem and the challenge that always occurs is that the contract officers don't necessarily know how to apply it, right? So, like I mentioned earlier, the acquisition reform that's going on right now within DoD will help to provide that guidance to the contracting officers. But it's imperative that the contractors, the folks working day in, day out, work with their government contracting officers, work with their clients that are going to be writing these RFPs, to help them understand what level of security really needs to be embedded in the contract. Should it be a CMMC level 1? Should it be a CMMC level 3? Should it be a CMMC level 5? Et cetera. So it's important that you work with the government on that part, but it's also important that because there is the flexibility that within a single contract, a contract may come out and say it's CMC level 3, but every subcontract underneath that doesn't necessarily need to be CMMC level 3, or every component part of that big contract doesn't necessarily need to be at the same level. And there is room for that to happen. But it's going to be important for the contractors to work with the government to help the government understand where to apply the right level. Okay, because the contractors are the ones designing the systems, right? The government is out of the business anymore of writing very detailed specs, right? So the contractors writing those specs or helping to organize that contract need to help the government understand where to apply the right level. So it's important to work with your government clients early on that note.
Thank you, Brian. Next slide, please. So Brian, let's go back to you. What are the key initiatives that companies need to look at in preparing for this?
Well, yeah, so along that same line, first and foremost, it's important to start now, right? Because even if you have a 5-year contract and you're in year 2 of the contract, it may take some time to fill in the gaps that you may have. But the first step is really, again, working with your clients, understanding what the maturity level of the contracts need to be, and therefore, what does the maturity level of your organization need to be? What should you, or looking at your own strategy, what is the level that you aspire to be within your organization, so that you can go after those contracts and be proactively ready for those contracts. It may sound self-serving, but you're working with an outside CMMC consultant to help you understand your gaps is a key thing. Is very important, and they help you develop that gap analysis, help you develop those plans of action that you're going to need to take within the time that you have to fill those gaps. And most importantly is, from the very top of your organization all the way down through, you need to fund and execute those projects to fill those gaps. And it's going to take high-level buy-in to get this done. And it may not cost you that much, or it may be a major overhaul of your system. It really depends on your current situation. I think the other thing that is a concern, and Chris can talk a lot to this, is you have to maintain this program once you get it up and running. So you have to consider that as well.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of, Brian, you brought up a good point there in regards to just the maintenance of it. A lot of perspective is it's one and done, and we're seeing as it's you just need to put these controls in, and then you got to maintain them. As the NIST says, you need to identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, and that requires active management on a consistent basis, and therefore being able to protect the data ultimately.
Mark, would you like to chime in?
Sure. There's really 2 things going on here with CMMC. One of them is, yes, we are doing something that you could say this belongs to the IT people in your company. We're trying to protect the company from a cybersecurity point of view. But really, if you look at the driver behind CMMC, it's cultural change. Companies that don't bake cybersecurity at every level of the company, where everybody is thinking about the threat that a single email could bring with an attachment, where people are trained, where people are understanding and being thoughtful about risk, that's really not baked into us as a culture. Part of what CMMC is doing is creating awareness. The companies have to do all this work, and they have to get ready, and they have to become not 80% compliant or 95% compliant, but 100% compliant at whatever goal level they're at. What is that going to do to us as organizations, as suppliers to the DoD? That's going to change our culture. Culture of cybersecurity no longer belongs just to IT. It also belongs in the boardroom, where you're going to get reports and you're going to review budget allocations and make sure that cybersecurity is resourced. Because at the end of the day, you won't be able to get contracts if cybersecurity isn't part of the very fabric of your company. And so I think that's an important part of the whole conversation, is why are we doing all of this?
Yeah, and just to add to that, Mark, I think that's a great point. The cultural change in cultural changes, you'll probably have experience in your own organizations or your own experience is hard, right? Cultural change takes time. So the programs that you set in place, even if you don't think your contract's going to change in the next couple of years, the changes that you need to make in your organization may take those couple of years, right? And it may take that time to to really get to where you need to be. And and we'll probably talk about this later, but just to assess whether your organization not only needs it for the contract purposes, but just for doing your own business, right? So the CMMC processes and procedures aren't specific to DoD, right? These are industry best practices that we're putting in place. So it's important to be doing that anyway. CMMC is just a driver for it.
Great. Next slide, please. So we've talked about the timing, and obviously this is going to be a gradual rollout. Seems like contractors may not see it in their contracts for some period of time. So what's the rush to start preparing now? Let's start with Brian, and I'd like for Chris and Mark to chime in also. Brian, you're up first.
Okay, great. Yeah, so like we said, it takes time to get a security program up to snuff, and then to actually run it and do that cultural change. So the other issue is, the CMCAB is doing a great job, I believe, in getting the processes, the procedures up and running. Like Mark said, there are 300,000 plus DoD contractors out there, all of which are going to want to have their systems or their company certified, right, at a particular level. And right now we're starting where it's a brand new process, brand new program. So the assessors are not there yet. There's going to be a ramp up time, and it's going to take time to train up the number of assessors it's going to take to assess and recommend for certification 300,000 contractors, right? So there's going to be an initial backlog. So I'm kind of preaching to folks to say, look, you need to be ready when it's your time to get your assessment and to get that certification. You need to be ready the first time, right? You need to be ready to win the first time out. When you write an RFP, you put all that work into a contract. You can't have something hanging out there that's well, I should be able to pass. You need to be passing. You need to be getting that stuff done early. And it's also being this isn't something that there's going to be a waiver for. From what we understand from the DoD, it's a go no go decision at your contract award, and the DoD will not be awarding contracts to people that aren't certified at the level that they require.
Chris, do you have a perspective to share on this?
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. I think it goes back to timing as well too. And the nice part about IT is you typically have a 3 to 5 year life cycle on a lot of the technology. So being able to actually start now at this point in time and having a roadmap, you can with proper planning, you can definitely start implementing these controls in a very systematic way, so that you're not or you can minimize your costs, or at least plan your cost accordingly through the life cycle of the technology, and therefore satisfying these controls going forward. So I think having that plan up front, having that goal, and slowly implementing these changes over time, so that you're at that point, where you stand when you go to that assessment, and you'll be very prepared. So I think that's a important way, and then you can do it fiscally responsibly as well too. And I think that's really important to take into consideration the size of your organization. I mean, some organizations sit there and they have no IT infrastructure or minimal. It's been a very ad hoc environment. And then you've got some very larger organizations that have a huge, IT infrastructure. So each of those scenarios have their own challenges. One is maybe there's a lower budget that all of a sudden now needs to be increased and adjusted, or you have that large organization that it's going to take huge efforts to change any types of policies and procedures or processes or IT they have in that industry. So I think it's getting a good plan up front is just going to be critical.
Mark, what would you like to add?
No, I think you guys have nailed it. I'll make a quick comment though. You said there's a 3 to 5 year timeline on technology. That's actually true in many cases, but there's no 3 to 5 year timeline on culture, right? So in your business, when you buy some new software tool or you put something on your network, are you first asking, what is the risk of putting this on my network? Has this company been checked out? Are they a US company? Are they from China? Could they be sending this information that's on my network back to China? Cultural change isn't necessarily about the specific technology. It's about whether you're asking those questions of yourself and your organization. That has no timeline on it. So the time to start on that now, I could challenge with a bunch of other questions that you should be asking yourself. Are we thinking about cybersecurity all the time? Are we baking that into our decision making? That's what we're really striving for, is to make it a part of it. And then it'll be manifest in lots of different ways that you'll discover later on.
Next slide, please. All right, Chris, you're getting the $1 million question, literally. So we know that you want to continue or start working with the DoD. This is very important. But what does it look like from a budgeting perspective? What's this going to cost?
Well, I think that's it all depends upon your existing budgets that you have as well too, and what we like to say is the service level maturity of your business already when it comes to technology as a whole, and your culture with IT and so forth. So I think the big things that we've seen out there for costs are the cost of understanding your gaps, and that analysis, having someone come in and do that for you. Then obviously you have the projects that are involved in filling those gaps to get to the levels that you need to be. You're going to have the cost of the assessment when that comes out. You're going to have the fee to the CMMC accreditation body. And then obviously it becomes your day-to-day operational costs of maintaining your cybersecurity posture and at the approximate level that you desire at that point. And then one thing I think Mark can actually talk a little bit more in, as well as the recertification process and what's going to be involved on that based upon the level that you're at. But I think the things to consider is if you've got DoD contracts and you make as I think Brian said, one of the warm-ups for this was, if you're getting paid $10 making $10 a year on a government contract, is it worth going through these efforts? That's the type of consideration in business effort of is that worth risking, versus, hey, my business is 90% of my revenue is based upon my DoD government contracts. Obviously you have to understand that if you don't comply and it's no go, those contracts are at risk. And then I'll let Brian speak a little bit more to the allowable costs as well too, based on the contracting side.
Yeah, so the DoD folks, Ms. Arrington, who's been driving this, has been talking about that a lot, and they expect that these costs will be allowable under your cost structure. Again, how that's built in to your cost is, I think, TBD. And Mark, if you've heard anything more about that, you can let us know. But when you build in allowable costs, is if you know how costs are built up, this will become an allowable cost under your overhead structure, is my understanding. So that will allow you to recoup the cost over time, over contracts. But it's not. I don't anticipate that they're going to have one contract's going to absorb the entire cost, but it remains to be seen. Mark, do you have any insight on that?
In terms of allowable costs, that's really a DoD issue. So DoD is going to work to integrate all of this. Yeah, it is true that these will be allowable costs, and that can be built into the overhead. The details of that part of it really are between the contractors and the DoD, and they are also going to be producing more information, more education internally and externally about that whole process over the summer.
Good.
Great, guys. Well, we know that these are not the only budgetary items to consider. So let's look at the next slide, please. It seems like there will be some additional items to consider. Let's talk about the economic impact. Chris, you're up.
Sure. So I guess the economic impact is, obviously this is creating a sub-industry, if you will, at this point. So there's an opportunity for corporate solution expansion. And obviously one of the big things is identifying, your policies, procedures, your needs, your gaps analysis, and doing all those different types of things that Edgeworth Performance Solutions does at that point. You're going to have the economic impacts in Maryland as well, or across the country, is supporting the industries that are supporting the compliance requirements and maintaining the systems out there, such as MSPs or MSSPs like Epic. Then you're going to have the, obviously, like the accreditation body. We're going to have trainers coming out there as well too, and training people in terms of cybersecurity posture, end user awareness training, different types of things like that that are requirements within the CMMC or the NIST. And then obviously we now have a whole group of businesses that I think there's industry that's already out there for assessors, but now we're adding another a group of type of assessors or assessor certifications, if you will, with the CMMC. But I think, the ultimate thing is, why are we here and why are we doing what we're doing? And I think it's to protect the U.S. data and intellectual property. Mark mentioned, the economic impact of how much is lost on a regular basis. And that's what protects the United States, ultimately protects our, competitive advantage, and obviously protects the U.S. economy. And I think that's where we're all here. And just kind of in terms of the Maryland impact, it's amazing that, Maryland generates about $57 billion worth of defense contracts on a annual basis, which is a huge economic impact. And that's what's allowed Maryland to be relatively sheltered in some of the ups and downs in the economy within the United States. We're fortunate that we have a good commercial sector as well as a government contracting sector and as well as government, and therefore that's really kept a lot of revenue in the area. And then obviously the nice thing too with the CMMC, it's the accreditation body with, as Mark on the board there, it's rooted in Maryland. And, so we are kind of the epicenter here for, the large government contracts, the accreditation bodies. So Maryland's going to play a big impact in terms of a national input across the board. So I think it's exciting for Maryland.
Thanks, Chris. Next slide, please. So clearly this is an investment for our companies, and our companies don't make investments until we measure out a return on investment. So Mark, can you speak to this piece? And I'd also like for Chris and Brian to chime in when Mark is done. So Mark, why don't you kick this one off and talk about the investment piece?
Sure. Well, first of all, it is a maturity model. So let's talk about level one. At level one, there are 17 practices that companies have to follow. I have to tell you, you should be doing all of these things at home. Your grandmother should be doing these things at her home. These are the basics of cybersecurity. They don't require policies and procedures and all sorts. Do you have antivirus on your computer? Do you have passwords that aren't the default passwords? Things like that. So they're very accessible. If you find that you're not doing some of those things, you may have to start making some investments. Certainly there'll be an investment in getting assessed and making sure that you're ready before you're assessed. But then when you get to level 3, you start to have to understand you must understand where the data is. You have to have policies and procedures and plans that you're following. All of that is going to require an investment on your part. Is the investment worthwhile? Well, there's a business decision. Is it worthwhile so that you can remain profitable? And we talked about the allowable expense. But also, is it really possible for you to secure your business and for you to operate successfully and not do those things with reputation risk and other problems that are really directly affecting you? That's important. Now, these tax credits represent Maryland's investment in Maryland companies that are participating in the supply chain. The one-time investment from going from where you are to a new culture and a new awareness and a new normal, that's what these tax credits are going to help you with. First, you're going to do a gap assessment of some sort, internally, externally. You use one of the people that are on the call. You'll understand what the delta is between where you are and where you need to be. And then, as was referenced earlier, once you get to where you need to be, it doesn't take care of itself. So a part of your investment is going to be maintaining and understanding for a very dynamic threat. For example, before I became involved in CMMC, nobody cared to try to send me a whole lot of adversarial spam to get into my computers. The threat goes up, the threat changed. I had to adjust what I was doing and my ways of operating when I went from a position that was relatively unknown to a place where I was one of a small board of people. That threat's going to change for your companies. It changes every day. The question is, will you know about it?
Thank you, Mark. And Whitney, would you be kind enough to advance to the investment page? Right before the takeaways, please. Yep, that's great. Thank you. Chris, would you like to weigh in on the benefits?
Sure. Well, obviously, I think it's it's a requirement for all DoD contracts. And ultimately, it's a not necessarily a competitive advantage, but obviously it's a requirement going forward, especially when they start the contracts actually specify that you need to be XYZ or whatever level of the CMC requirement for achieving those contracts or winning those contracts. But I think the big thing is going to basically it's going to help you maintain your existing contracts as you work forward. I think you'll start, with your contracting officers, you're going to start seeing questions come down from them to ask where you're at. You may see some flow downs now in your contracts as well too, in terms of asking, are you prepared? What status are you? So I think they're definitely starting to ring the bell to say, hey, this is coming down from the contracting side as well. And obviously you want to be able to comply with any modifications to your existing contracts as they come down the pipe. And then also as well too, fulfilling any new requirements that you may have and understanding that and having an open dialogue with your contracting officers, because you may have a situation where your levels may change, or the levels that need to flow down to your subcontractors may be different. Just understanding that and understanding how to navigate that's going to be key. But obviously it's critical, especially if your business is 100% dedicated toward government contracting.
Excellent. Brian?
Yeah, just want to point, we did skip one piece of information about the Maryland Defense Cybersecurity Assistance Program that's being run by the Maryland MEP. So that's an opportunity actually for small businesses doing defense work that are in Maryland to get some of this paid for through the Maryland MEP program. If you want more information about that, I think any of the Mark or Chris or myself can help you answer those questions about that. But it's a great opportunity for you to get some of this paid for through the Maryland MEP through a grant program that they have, I believe, is through DHS grant. But anyway, that's another good avenue for getting some of this paid for. And the benefits to the business, again, it's not only gives you an opportunity to open up the window for you for defense contracts and subcontracts, but also, we are expecting to see this, if it's successful with the DoD, the federal feds are going to follow. So we're going to probably see changes in the FAR. We may even see changes in other regulatory things. We've been seeing some press about Sarbanes-Oxley getting changed. That sort of thing requiring more cybersecurity. So if CMMC is successful with the Department of Defense, I think it's going to roll out across a lot more of the industrial base. So it's an opportunity to get into it now, get into it quick, and maintain your systems now, that not only for your own benefit, but also for the benefit of the clients that you're supporting. I think that's good.
So Brian,
could I just put an exclamation point on that MEP program? There are 51 MEPs across the country. Maryland's has the strongest program by far. They do an incredible job. They will help you get assessed affordably. And then when you discover something that you have to fix, you can get up to, I think it's $10,000 in direct grants to pay for whatever it is that you discovered that you needed to get done. Fantastic program, fantastic resource in the state of Maryland, and it definitely should be explored as you're going down this process.
I was going to say, Mark, actually, can we go back to 2 slides? Let's just kind of go through those real quick on the one more as well too. So there's two programs. There's a Buy Maryland Cyber Tax Credit, where basically companies can get up to 50% back of net purchases, up to $50,000 back in tax credits if they purchase from a qualified cyber company. And that's a great way to pay for services, product, et cetera. And it's a great way to help bridge the gap for companies that need to start investing in their IT. And that's run by the state of Maryland itself. If you go to the next slide, please. We've got the MDMEP, which we talked about, which has one of the great program. The requirement is that you have 10% of the revenue from a DoD contract, and you will be able to get a grant, and they'll give you X amount of money for doing your gap analysis, as well as you can get additional funding for remediation as things go on. We've actually been able to use this program to get up to $12,500 per client. It is dependent upon the size of the organization, and that is a straight grant check that they get in terms of assistance. And we're able to pair that with the qualified Maryland cyber company as well too. So it really helps take that sting off initially as you start walking down the process. And I mean, obviously we know this is the government realizes, the state government realizes that, A, this is a financial investment as you're trying to change your IT culture and your IT posture. So obviously they're trying to assist as best they can to protect, the businesses within the state of Maryland.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, the financial investment piece certainly is a big piece of this whole program. Can we advance to the takeaway slide, please? Thank you. I want to thank all the panelists for all of their information they provided. Lots of information and items to consider as contractors. Please please share with the group your top takeaways. And let's start with Mark. Top takeaways from today.
My top takeaway is that the industry is ready to support you, and starting later is not nearly as good as starting yesterday. This is a new industry. What's the risk? Everybody wakes up at the same time, and there aren't enough resources to support your company because there hasn't been enough time to train them. It also takes a little while to schedule an assessment, go through it. I'm talking especially at level 3 and above. That means if you handle CUI. So if you haven't started already, if you're only thinking about it, this is not the kind of thing that you want to sit on over the summer and start later, because guess what? There's going to be a competition for resources as everybody wakes up and they start to hear about contracts that say you must have met CMMC level 3 to win this award. And at that point in time, if you don't have it, you're going to be competing with other people who are also equally worried. So the time to start thinking and start acting is now. Be ready. And then it's a matter of scheduling your assessment. You will already be in the right place. My top takeaway is we have great resources. Right on this call, you have companies that understand CMMC. They and others like them are there to help you. If you wait, it will be at your own peril.
Thank you, Mark. Man, we've got some awesome questions in the chat room, so we're gonna go to Chris right now. Final takeaway, Chris.
Yeah, I think I think the big thing is start now. I think ultimately it's the thing is this is you can't stop everything that you're doing to start working on your compliance, right? You still have to run the business. You have to fulfill your mission. You need to do all those different types of things. So starting now allows you to slowly make these changes so that you can be ready when your contract's required. So obviously, just get moving, understand what needs to be done, at least understand where you are and where you need to be. Start those dialogues, start those conversations so that like Mark said, it's not a rush at the end, because that's our worst fear is people saying, I want to be able to do this, but unfortunately, there's just not enough time or enough resources to do it.
Thanks, Chris. Brian, final takeaway.
Yeah, I think echo all of that. Starting early, starting now is important. And the one thing a lot of people will take for granted, if let's say their maturity level is going to be level 1, they'll take it for granted. Yeah, that's just basic stuff. Of course, I'm doing that stuff. Well, if everybody was doing all of that basic stuff, right, already, we wouldn't have the problems we have today. I mean, there are exploits happening out in the community that are taking advantage of vulnerabilities that have been in the systems for decades, right? People are still using systems that are outdated or are not even supported anymore by the vendors. Those kind of things are part of that level 1 analysis, vulnerability management, just really understanding what your vulnerabilities are. People are not, you may think, level 1 is going to be a cakewalk. It might be, but until you really understand what level 1 is and what you need to do and really take a hard look at your own systems, you don't know, okay? And you don't want to be caught in a situation where you pay for an audit or pay for an assessment to come in and then find out that you're not even level 1, right? So even if you think your target is level 1, start now to understand whether you're doing it right.
Great takeaway, guys. Next slide, please, Whitney. All right, there's contact information for the panel. And I know Whitney has been monitoring the Q&A in the chat room. So let's see what we have.
Yeah, Jim, thank you so much. And thank you to Brian, Mark, Chris, and of course, Jim for moderating today. There are a lot of companies that are in Maryland who will need to go through the certification, and this topic is vital. I think you guys had a great slide about the economic impact, and when we look at what's happening now and really just in Maryland in general, that to know that Maryland businesses can be at the forefront and to have an opportunity to get certified. So thank you to everyone who has shared information. We have a lot of questions that have come in. We will not be able to get to all of them, but we will make sure that these questions are disseminated to our speakers. And so whatever we don't get to, we will make sure that they have those questions. So thank you to everyone. Can someone just tell me real quick, is CMMC impacted or delayed at all by COVID-19?
I'll take that one, I guess. And yes, there have been some impacts, and the people that we're working with were generally impacted by COVID, like all of us have been. But since we're a board at this point, and we all live in different states, we were going to be remote anyway for this stage of our build out. So it has affected us somewhat and our ability to communicate with third parties, but in communicating with each other, we're basically on track. Talking weeks, not months of changes. Great.
Thank you, Mark. One of the first questions that was asked, and this takes us back to really the beginning of the conversation. It says for the 10 to 15 contracts, I think that were recently awarded, what do you mean that the scoring won't count? And does that mean that they won't be required to be CMMC certified in order to win the RFP? I know that's a really specific question, but if someone can chime in.
That's a fantastic question, and thank you so much for asking for that clarification. So counting for score is something that's really a timing matter, and we don't know what that timing is going to be. So the ultimate resource for understanding whether your score is going to count or not, if you happen to be involved in one of these contracts, is going to be the RFI itself and the RFP. So at the initial stages, they may not count, but at some point they're going to start to count, or maybe they will have all the ducks in a row before we start the first Pathfinder contract. There's nothing on the schedule yet. Like, all of that work is being done right now. So counting for score is something that we want to make sure happens as soon as possible. Everybody does. Nobody wants to go through this effort and realize that it sort of didn't count permanently. So it's a matter of timing. So take the comment that I made earlier broadly. The specifics will be in your RFI and RFP, and as soon as they can count for score, they absolutely will. We are working, and actually this is more of a DoD question than a CMMC question, but everybody is working together to make sure that this whole system comes up and gets activated as soon as possible.
Thank you very much, Mark. Someone has asked, is there a list of qualified Maryland cybersecurity sellers? Who would like to take that question?
Well, I guess I will. Yeah, there is a list, and unfortunately I don't have the website in front of me where you get that list. Edwards Performance Solutions is on that list, but yeah, the Maryland state keeps that. So we can find that and get it out and get it posted along with the documents. That's okay.
Okay. Yeah, that would be great. And just for everyone listening, if there are any resources from the companies that are speaking, they can send them to us via email. We'll make sure that those get up on the website as well. So let's circle back and talk about the MEP program. I agree that it's an outstanding program here in Maryland. Can someone attest to if they cover the cost of the assessment or gap analysis? We talked about a $10,000 figure, but if someone could give a little bit more detail about that, we'd appreciate it.
Sure, I think I can answer that a little bit about, but I will defer that to Sarah Keith at MD-MEP. She runs that program, and it is specific to the company and your posture there as well too. So what I'll put in I just put in the chat the link to the funding page for the QMCC and a link to the qualified Maryland cyber companies, and I'll put the link up there for the MD-MEP as well too, and you can reach out to them directly to get it. But typically there is a little bit of a funding specifically for, and don't hold me to the numbers, approximately $3,000 for the gap analysis. And then obviously based upon those gap analysis, there is potential to get up to $12,500, depending on the size of organization. But those are all based upon your organization and your relationship with the MD-MEP.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that explanation. Someone in here has asked about sample documents for, it looks like the 17 practices. So it doesn't elaborate from there, but does anyone?
I can probably help with that. Go to our website, cmmcab.org. Up at the top, it says the CMMC standard. Click on that, it'll take you. It's a little bit hard to find if you go through the DoD's interface, but that will take you right to the CMMC program. There's a link there for the model. There's some other documents that can help you, and then pop those open. You'll be able to read about the model. Now, what the board is doing is creating a standard. So the model is what you have to be compliant with. What the accreditation body is doing is giving you the guidance on just how much does it take to actually view yourself as compliant. But for the basics, go follow the DoD link that's on the top of the CMMC AB website. Next week, it's going to be on the bottom of the CMMC AB website. Either way, that'll take you right where you need to go. And I'm seeing in the text here that it doesn't show example implementation. It doesn't quite go to that level, but for each one of the practices, there is an example of that practice, and it's written to the level of 8th grade English. It's meant for everybody to understand. What we want in this CMMC standard is for it to be clear, consumable, and consistent. So part of consumable means that you can find an example when you get to some practice if you don't understand it. It'll tell you, what does this mean in the real world? Really good document, highly recommend checking it out. It's not a bad read because, like I said, it's written for everybody to consume, not just for the ninja, technical, geeky kind of people. It's written at a level for all of us.
And Mark, just point out that's in the appendix.
That is in the appendix, I believe. It says there's a CMMC, I think, I'm trying to think, Appendix D possibly, where it says CMMC clarification, and then it provides an example. So in this case, the appendix is usually the throwaway part at the end. Actually, I think the good part is in the appendix.
Sounds like some good weekend reading. So Mark, I think this question might be for you, but obviously for anyone who might want to chime in, will the provisional period include CMMC level 4 or 5 assessments and contracts?
No, it will not. At least it's very hard to make definitive statements about things that sort of the board doesn't control, but the current plan is that it's levels 1 through 3. We're going to get our feet wet at levels 1 through 3. Levels 4 and 5 is going to come a little bit later. Those are more complex, and we're going to learn a lot of lessons on the way to 4 and 5.
Great. We have a lot of absolutely outstanding questions in here. Another one is, what happens if an RFP awardee is not CMMC certified? Does it go to the next preferred vendor, or is the contract recompeted?
If that's for me, the answer is that that's going to be up to the DoD, but the real answer is it's a go, no-go decision. So I don't know what exceptions they will invent or not invent. You should go with the understanding that if you do not have your CMMC certification by the time of the award, you will not be awarded the contract. That's the singular message that they are sharing with the world. So until you hear something different, go by that as your understanding.
So as someone said at the end, start now, start yesterday, right? Get your internal processes going. So how will the assessor's capabilities differ from the FedRAMP 3PAO requirements? Wow, I mean, you guys in government contracting, I don't understand your acronyms, but somebody on this call does.
Does anybody else want to take that one? Go for
Nope.
it.
That's all
Or I
you,
can-
Mark.
So FedRAMP is another certification model. It's used generally, so if you go to the FedRAMP marketplace, you will see a lot, it's mostly for cloud services. So they have a moderate and a high level of cloud service. If you're handling CUI and you're storing it in a cloud service, you're likely going to have to use something called IL4, more acronyms, but the FedRAMP High generally is aligned with IL4. That's where you're going to store this CUI data to make sure that it's well protected and encrypted, and the people that work for those companies are only US citizens. So it's important to understand that FedRAMP is a standard. It's out there. There are a lot of similarities, and we are working on reciprocity agreements. So if your particular company actually is FedRAMP moderate or FedRAMP high and you've been examined, we're going to look for ways between FedRAMP and ISO and other standards that you don't have to go through it all over again. That stuff is not out there yet. So for right now, know that we know that you went to a lot of trouble and expense to become FedRAMP moderate or whatever it is that you've become. We're working on that reciprocity, the actual technicalities of how that's delivered, not quite sure yet. We do expect that the people, the actual people, the individuals who are doing those FedRAMP assessments, it will be very attractive for them also to expand their knowledge, get some training from us, and be able to offer this as another type of assessment that those same people do. But they are not the same thing, short of any reciprocity that comes in the future.
Great, thank you. And so I think we'll end on this last question from one of our attendees. It says, and this person attended another presentation on a similar topic, and I would imagine there's a lot of information that's coming out, and the timeline has been very short. So I would imagine some of this is confusing and maybe contradictory, but this person is asking, if they would learn that it was stated in a different presentation that each tier of a contract, prime to sub, sub to sub, et cetera, is the prior tier responsible for ensuring that the next tier is CMMC certified, or is it the prime's responsibility? Big question.
So it's a flow down requirement within the contract. So if you're talking, if the question is really saying if I'm a sub, direct sub to a prime, and I have a second tier, third tier sub, who's responsible for that second, third tier sub? I'd say the ultimate answer is the prime is responsible, but if you're subcontracting out, because the prime is responsible directly to the government. But if you're subbing something out, you have to flow it down into your subcontractor, at whatever level, and it's a flow down beyond that. So yeah, I mean, every step of the way, if you're subcontracting something that's been subcontracted to you, you're ultimately responsible for the delivery of that, right, to the prime. The prime is responsible for the delivery of that to the government. So I hope that answers the question, but it's.
Yes, thank you, Brian. And there was a lot of questions in here that we were not able to get to. We want to be cognizant. It is just shy of 12 o'clock. For everyone on the call, thank you so much for taking the time to dial in. A huge thank you to Brian Hubbard, Mark Berman, Chris Reismandel, and of course, Jim Reese. We will be sharing these questions with our speakers. So thank you again to all of you for joining us. Absolutely outstanding information. And please look by the end of the day that this webinar that has been recorded will be online. And if you'd like us to connect with the speakers, we would be more than happy, or certainly you see their emails here and you can reach out to them yourself. So gentlemen, thank you very much for your time, your energy, and your expertise. And from the Maryland Chamber of Commerce, we hope everyone continues to stay well and be healthy, and have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Take care. Thanks, Jim.